A Baltimore City school failing hundreds of students.
Where is the help for him? I hate that this is happening to my child.
A student with a 0.13 GPA ranks near the top half of his class.
Not a 1.3, people, a 0.13.
Fallout overwhelming.
This is just completely unacceptable. I mean, it's worse than anything I've heard in the whole time that I've been governor.
What the education system has done to this kid is atrocious and embarrassing.
A story that struck a nerve with more than 2 million views across 100 countries.
I believe it's violating the constitutional rights of those children.
Now, a community call to action after decades of underperforming in Baltimore City schools. And a Fox 45 News commitment to hold elected leaders accountable.
I want to take responsibility and say that I'm sorry for what happened.
I want to take this opportunity to apologize to those students and families who may have been affected.
This is a Project Baltimore, Your Voice, Your Future Town Hall.
And hello, everybody. I'm Mary Bubala. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We will be having a very serious discussion about the failures in some Baltimore City schools, including Augusta Fells Savage, a West Baltimore high school where Project Baltimore learned a student with a 0.13 GPA was ranked near the top half of his class. And our discussion comes less than 24 hours before the 7 members of the Baltimore City Council Education Committee will question City School CEO Dr. Sonia Santelises about the problems at Augusta Fells. Tonight, we have a very special panel of experts to talk about the questions that Dr. Santelises needs to answer tomorrow night. Joining us tonight, our Project Baltimore lead investigative reporter Chris Papps, Act Now founder and senior pastor of Union Baptist Church, Al Hathaway, former City Council member and charter school founder Carl Stokes, Maryland State Delegate Trent Kittleman, and Adam Andrzejewski, founder of OpenTheBooks.com. It is a nonprofit devoted to transparency in government. Thank you all for being here. Chris, we're going to start with you. First, let's listen to the apology that Dr. Santelises made last month after Project Baltimore came out with its explosive report on Augusta Fells.
I want to take this opportunity to apologize to those students and families who may have been affected. We will continue to work with families on corrective steps to get their students back on course on the path to graduation.
Before we talk with Chris, let's quickly go through the timeline of the Augusta Fells story that led to the apology. Tiffany France's son started high school at Augusta Fells in 2017. In each of the next 3 years, he was promoted in his classes. In 2021, after only passing 3 classes with a grade point average of 0.13, France was informed her son would not graduate and would have to start high school all over again, become a freshman again. Well, Project Baltimore learned at least half of the class has a grade point average near 0. The school system would not talk on camera about the results at this school, only offering a 2-page statement and confirming an internal investigation was launched in 2019. Well, the day after that story broke, the State Inspector General for Education texted that he was looking for parents to reach out who have had similar problems. So, Chris, we know the CEO has apologized, but finally, City Council members are going to be able to ask her some direct questions. Where should they start?
Well, Mary, I think it's worth pointing out here that not only will the school system not talk, but we wouldn't know about any of this had Project Baltimore not received some tips from the community that something was going on at Augusta Fells, and had Tiffany France not reached out to us saying what happened to her son. So I think it's a very important thing that we need to start with here, that this is only because a mother reached out to us and said something wasn't right at this school, and that has led to everything that you mentioned in that timeline afterwards. But as far as the questions that Dr. Santelises could potentially be asked at the city council hearing that she's been called before, I think that there's 3 main subjects that she should be asked about. One would obviously be the promotion of this student. So we know, looking at Tiffany France's son's transcripts, that he was being promoted through the courses even though he was failing. In his 4 years at Augusta Fells, he only passed 3 classes. But we know that he failed Spanish 1, but was promoted to Spanish 2. We know he failed Algebra 1, was promoted to Algebra 2, and we know that he failed English 3, or English 2 rather, and was promoted to English 3. So the first question to Santelises, I think, should be, how can something like that happen? And what would be the motivation for a principal or a scheduler at the school to put a student into a class when he failed the prerequisite for that class? Are you not just setting that student up for more failure? The second question would have to do with absences. Tiffany Francis' son in his 4 years at that school was absent or late 359 times. 359 times he was absent or late in 4 years. What was that school doing to prevent something like this from happening? That is just stunning to even think about. That is half the days. There's 180 days in a school year. That's more than half the days, because by the time we got his transcripts, he wasn't in for 4 years total. He was in for about 3.5. And the third part of this, Mary, would be Fox 45, Project Baltimore, has now reported that there were ghost students inside of this school. There were students that the school was getting funding for that were not present in that school and were not enrolled in that school. Dr. Santelises should be asked if this school received any funding for students that were enrolled on paper but were not actually inside of that school. And Mary, that right there, which is news that Project Baltimore broke 4 weeks into this investigation, we just broke this story, that right there could be the biggest question of all, because that involves potentially hundreds of thousands of taxpayer dollars that went to educate students that were not in that school.
And potentially another huge story out of all of this. All right, Chris, thank you. Well, let's check in now with Reverend Hathaway. But first, here's what some Baltimore residents would ask the school CEO if they got a chance.
Yes, we have a lot of questions.
Why would they want to take away the education that they supposed to have in the first place?
Even if I was a teacher, I probably would do the same thing too, just to get this child out my face. And I don't think that's fair.
I think it needs to be a little bit more balanced. And I say that because the kids aren't educated properly.
And sometimes I look at it too like this. If the parents ain't got no education, what you gonna teach your child? What you gonna teach your child?
Where is the money going at?
Yeah, where is the money going?
I would want to ask them, well, if COVID wasn't on, how do they think kids would be able to sit in the classroom? A lot of them wasn't getting their education before the COVID because it was too hot in the school.
People need to step up to the plate and deal with their child and stop being a friend to their child and be a parent to their child.
All right, Reverend Hathaway, you have set up hubs across the city to allow religious leaders to help connect citizens to government. What are you hearing about the questions the CEO needs to answer?
I think one of the key questions is, and before I say that, let me just tell you, I'm a proud graduate of the Baltimore City Public School System. I had an amazing education. It equipped me for my life's career. I know that our Baltimore City Public School System, when it's properly functioning, can produce good students and good quality education. But the real question that I would have deals with reporting. We walked through the district with Councilman John Bullock, and I was surprised to learn from Councilman Bullock that he did not receive any reports as a council member of the status of the schools in his district. So the real question I would ask of CEO Santelises is, does the Baltimore City Public School System provide reports to the council members of the status of the schools in their district in terms of chronic absences, in terms of the park schools?
I like that because city council members could help in all of this. They could be connecting pieces between some of the families and the schools. So I think that is an excellent place to start. All right, Reverend Hathaway, thank you. Let's move on to former Councilman Carl Stokes. There are 7 members of the Education Committee. What would you tell the current members about the questions they should be asking the CEO? And with your past experience with charter schools, does that bring even more questions that should be asked?
It does, but I think the first question is how deep and how wide is this problem? It is not just one student. We've been talking about this one student quite a bit. There are thousands of students in the same position as this young man. Thousands, and I'm not kidding you. You would think, you would even cringe to hear that. First of all, the system doesn't submit to audits. It refuses to be audited. It refuses to acknowledge that it is working on behalf of parents and students. So this is a very deep problem. You, meaning WBFF and Fox 45 and 54, have exposed before, just 3 years ago, that there were 5 high schools in the city where no student in either of those 5 schools was proficient in math, could not pass the math proficiency test. No student in 5 schools. There are maybe 20, 25 really good working schools out of 180 schools in the city. But the other schools are mediocre to worse. And when I say worse, I mean horrible. They are killing the lives of these young people. So my question, I think that the council should ask first and foremost, is open the books. Let us see how wide and how deep this problem is.
All right, I like it. Well, let's turn to Delegate Trent Kittleman. First, let's listen to what Governor Hogan had to say after he saw our Project Baltimore report on the failing school.
If they're persistently failing schools, we've got to shut the schools down, or we've got to, get rid of the principals and the teachers and start over with a new program, because we're failing the kids. That's what it's all about. It's not just an argument about money, and it's not just an argument about, who's right on the issues of how we do education. It's these kids that are suffering.
Well, Delegate Kittleman, what do you think about what the governor is saying, and what questions do you think need to be asked of the school CEO?
I think the governor is absolutely right, and Councilman Stokes said exactly what I say. I have been following this and really want to thank Project Baltimore for doing such a fantastic job and letting us know what's going on there. And I think because of the history, that one of the things that should be asked is, how do we fix it? Looking to see what happened, I think in this case, it looked primarily like a particular principle, and there is process. But I don't think that the situation in Baltimore City can be corrected before it wastes another 5 to 10 years of children, and that's way too long. What I would hope is that they would look toward more charter schools. There are charter schools, so many of them in Baltimore City, and almost all of them have waiting lists. And I think that's just wrong for parents who have kids that they want to get out of the failing schools, not to have the opportunity to put them into a charter school. We have the program Boost. I just wish you would talk to the rest of the General Assembly and let them know that there are ways, without spending a great deal of money, that this kind of problem can be fixed. But you have to be open to doing things. We had a bill came through to education savings accounts is another school choice opportunity. DC used to have terrible schools. They now have 50% of their schools are charter and 50% are regular. And they're doing far better than we are here in Baltimore. So that's kind of where I would ask the council to push and see if we can't do something better for the future.
We need a new model. That's interesting about DC. I didn't know that. And Delegate Kittleman, you had a chance to question the Chief of Staff for Baltimore City Schools about some of the problems at Augusta Fells. Were you satisfied with the answers you got?
Well, it was in a hearing, and I didn't want to press the point too hard, but she thought perhaps that I was only talking about the Augusta Fells incident. That's just the tip of the iceberg. As Councilman Stokes said, this goes back for a very, very long time. And what I said on the floor of the House is that, we've wasted over 40 years of children in Baltimore City, and it's just not right. It isn't.
All right,
so no, I was not satisfied with her answer.
I gotcha. Then quickly, what do you think needs to be asked more than what you asked?
How are they going to keep track of schools in the future so that it doesn't take 5 years to learn that there is a serious problem in a school?
That makes sense. That would be a good question to ask and get answered. All right, we're going to turn to Adam Andrzejewski of OpenTheBooks.com. But first, let's look at some of the numbers. We are learning just how much of the school's budget comes from you, the taxpayer. We found 73% of North Avenue's funding comes from state taxpayers. The district spends an average of more than $15,000 per year. Per student last year, rather. And with a budget of $1.2 billion, when it comes to funding, Baltimore City Schools is ranked 5th of the major public school districts. So, Adam, given those numbers, what would be the questions you want answered from the leader of city schools?
So I think the two fundamental questions for the CEO revolve around on-the-record answers. The CEO needs to go on the record on the two major issues, which are nearly 100% issues with the people of Baltimore. So here's the first issue, and it is straight up transparency. Project Baltimore has a tremendous sunshine request into the school district right now, into the CEO, on basic educational outcomes. It's the student GPA. It is the absence record of the district. It is the percentage of students that go to college, and it is the colleges that accept the students in the senior class. Those are answers that the school district has right now. It shouldn't take them 30 days or longer. Last time in 2017, it took a lawsuit from Project Baltimore, Fox 45, to force open questions that needed answers. This should not take a lawsuit. The district should open the books in a transparent fashion and give answers to these core questions. Here's the second issue. I think it's 100% principle amongst the people of Baltimore that on the educational mission of the district, that as much as possible, dollars should follow the student in the classroom and not the educational bureaucracy. Our auditors at OpenTheBooks.com found that out of employees in 2020 of the school district that worked a full 12 months, there was about 10,000 of them. Only 4,500 of those were teachers. What that means is for every teacher in the classroom, there was more than one employee in the district employed in a role outside of the classroom. And first off, the CEO herself made $126,000 more on cash compensation than a cabinet level position in Washington, D.C., and that's the secretary of the Department of Education itself. She makes a tremendous amount of money. So when we're talking about bringing dollars into the classroom to educate children and away from the bureaucracy, she could actually lead on this as an example and cut her pay back to reasonable levels.
I want to go back to Reverend Hathaway and ask, what are some of the things the city school system could learn from what's being done to help educate children at churches in Baltimore?
Problem with chronic absence. When you look at the rate in 2020 of Black and African American elementary school students, it was 39%. If you look at the rate for Hispanic high school students, it was 69%. My real question deals with what's going to happen after post-COVID, and I will offer to the Baltimore City public school system that faith-based organizations can play a role in this summer in terms of what would you call learning loss. We can assist in that effort. I believe that we should be utilizing that effort. We understand moral character building as well as we understand academic preparation. So I really would say to the public school system, do you have a strategy for learning loss this coming summer?
I want to go to Chris Papps. Chris, Mackenzie Frost did some reporting on this committee that is meeting tomorrow night, showing that it really doesn't have much power to change things. Do you think this hearing, though, is still important? What can come out of it?
Influence. So the way that the structure is set up in Maryland is that the school systems, the 24 school systems in the state, are largely autonomous. So they get massive amounts of funding from the taxpayers, from the state, from the federal government, and also from the local jurisdictions. But once they get that money, they can largely do with it what they want. And there's not a lot of restrictions on that money when it's coming in. So let's take Baltimore City, for example. The mayor and the city council approve a budget that goes to Baltimore City. But once that money gets there, they kind of can't do anything about it. And they don't work in the day-to-day operations of the school system, which from a journalist perspective, is somewhat part of the problem, because when we uncover issues like this, Mary, and Project Baltimore has been doing this for 4 years, if we go to the mayor, he says, well, I don't control the school system, you're talking to the wrong person. When we go to a member of city council, they say the same thing. We don't control the school system, you're talking to the wrong person. But the people in Baltimore City Public Schools are not elected. None of the school board is elected. The superintendent isn't elected. So they get $1.3 billion a year, and they really don't answer to anybody. They don't answer to the mayor. They don't answer to the school system or the city council, and they don't answer to the taxpayer. They don't answer to the voter. But what can come out of the hearing is influence. If these city council members and the mayor stepped up to a microphone and demanded answers, demanded transparency, and inserted themselves into the issues, then you could see an opening up of Baltimore City Public Schools, you could see more transparency, and you could see faster changes that could possibly be positive outcomes for the students and for the city itself.
Boy, we'll see what happens tomorrow then. Carl Stokes, I want to ask you, based on what Chris just said, do you think the City Council has then neglected to provide the proper oversight of city schools over the years?
I think that they have done some of the things that they could do, but they have been pushed back. As Chris says, they're an autonomous body. I spoke to the chairman, Councilor Robert Stokes, no relation, and other council members, as well as some state legislators who want to move forward with legislation to make the school board an elected school board so that it would be accountable at least to the taxpayers, at least to the citizens themselves. Right now, as Chris has mentioned, that body is autonomous. The mayor and the governor appoint the school board members, but then that's it. Once they're appointed, they are totally autonomous and do not answer to the mayor, the governor, or the citizens themselves. So an elected school board, but to your question, have the council done enough? The council has tried on numerous occasions. I'm not giving them a pass just because I was a former councilman, but I think they can do more. I think what Chris said is, and the pastor said, is that the council can go to the microphone. They can demand in the bully pulpit that the books are opened, or here's something novel, the council can take a suit against the Baltimore City Public Schools. They need to take an action that is more than just saying, we've done the best we can, we throw up our hands. They've got to take a more blatant action against the school board and the CEO, because they're being played, this is sort of a street term, they're being played for chumps. They really are, meaning the council. The board and the school system does whatever it pleases, and if you ask them for records, they don't give them to you unless you do what has been done by Chris, which is to sue them.
Correct, and try and pay money for it too. Well, the Democratic leadership in Annapolis say the Kerwin plan is the answer to the education problems in the city and across the city. I want to ask Delegate Kettleman, what's your view on that?
You know, I really, really wish that I thought the program would help. But the one thing that I have found, and I have history going back for a very long number of years on what has happened in the Baltimore City school system. And the primary ask that they have once a problem is identified is, well, we don't have enough money. We're X number of dollars less than we're supposed to have. And that it just isn't true. It isn't the case. So all of the money being pumped in through Thornton didn't work. And all of the money that will be pumped in through Kerwin, I am afraid won't do anything more. And even if it does work, it's not going to be for another 5 or 6 years before it makes any difference. And I hope in that time we can get past the idea that money is going to solve anything and look at the options of having some school choice. It's a real dichotomy as to whether you believe the government can do the best job for children or the parents can. And I think it's time to give the parents a choice.
Okay, I want to ask Adam probably our last question here, but we have some time to flesh it out. From your investigation, how does the Baltimore system compare to other school systems across the country when it comes to transparency? I'm really interested in this to see what it's like in other school districts.
So at OpenTheBooks.com, last year we filed 40,000 sunshine requests on nearly every single school district, municipality, and public body, government body in the country. And the Baltimore City Public Schools, they have responsibly produced their payroll records to our auditors, and that is what gives us the data to give oversight. One of the parts of that oversight this year, in 2020, we found 24 hall monitors were paid $700,000. And we found this was interesting because certainly the schools at one point were shut down, and then it was virtual learning for the rest of the year in 2020. And so the school district has responded to Fox 45 on this point. You know, hall monitors monitoring halls that had no children is one angle, but the hall monitors were actually then brought into the virtual classroom, and the school district says that they monitored the learning centers. So here's the question. Did they have the qualifications to be a part of the education learning process? Wouldn't the students of Baltimore be better off with entry-level qualified young energetic teachers on those learning stations than pulling the hall monitors in for $700,000 worth of cost on those learning stations? And this is where we get to the point. You can't educate children in the classroom if you're funding a big educational bureaucracy. Taxpayers, citizens, legislators need to take a hard look at the resource allocation of this school district.
Well, coming up tonight on Fox 45, Chris, you are going to be talking about the ghost students. As a city taxpayer myself, my jaw dropped when I heard sort of your preview. Again, tell us what it's about before we go.
So we obtained a document from sources inside Augusta Fells where in October of 2019, they conducted an audit of their senior class and found 21 students within that senior class were enrolled and therefore were funded by taxpayers, but we're not actually going to the school. So Baltimore City Schools gets about $16,000 per student per year from taxpayers. So at 21 students, you're looking at about $330,000 in 2019 was possibly delivered to North Avenue for students that didn't exist within the structure of the school system. Now, Mary, this is just one school. This is just one grade in one school. But this is our story for tonight. This is going to be our story that we're going to be looking at for a while. But North Avenue did tell us that this is part of their investigation into Augusta Fells, a document that we have, North Avenue already has. So this isn't just about grade changing. It is not just about pushing students through the school system without giving them the education. It's about Maryland taxpayers, Baltimore City taxpayers, and American taxpayers, because they get a lot of federal dollars pumped into that school system. It's about all of those taxpayers putting money into a school system to educate students who aren't even there. It's a scandal, Mary. It's a scandal.
We will be watching with eyes wide open tonight, and of course, we'll be watching the hearing tomorrow on what happens with the school CEO. That is all the time we have for tonight's Town Hall. We'd like to thank all of our panelists for their time, their expertise, and their thoughts. We so appreciate it. And we want to thank you for joining us. Have a great night.